Wedding season is in full bloom, and if you've been wanting a straighter smile, look no further than Bite. Bite offers clear teeth aligners that help you transform your smile from the comfort of your home or wherever you'll be this time of year. Forget the endless trips to the dentist. Bite's clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered straight to your doorstep. Just take an impression mold of your mouth, preview your 3D smile, and order your all-day or at-night aligners. Bite also knows that wedding season is expensive enough as it is. Their aligners cost thousands less than braces. It's time to let your smile shine. Get started on your smile journey by visiting Byte.com and use code WONDERY at checkout to get your at-home impression kit for only $14.95. That's BYTE.com, code WONDERY to get over 80% off your impression kit.
So this time we're doing something a little different. We recorded this podcast that you're about to hear. It was actually our pilot episode with Gretchen Rubin, who's the author of a bunch of best-selling books, including The Happiness Project and also Better Than Before. We recorded this as a bit of an experiment before the podcast was really officially up and running because we wanted to see if there was any there. So what you're about to hear is that we kind of messed up. The audio quality is actually suboptimal, but it's good enough for you to it's not going to be annoying to listen to, but it's just not as good as we wanted it to be. So we initially posted it and then pulled it down because the audio quality wasn't awesome. But Gretchen is really smart and just brimming with practical solutions to make your life better. So we wanted to post it again because I think you're going to enjoy it. The one the one sort of exception to the rule of this podcast is that she doesn't really meditate, and you'll hear me nag her a little bit about that. But she's amazing and a good friend, and has been an unstinting supporter of lots of the weird little projects on which I've embarked in recent years. So enjoy Gretchen. From ABC, this is the 10% Happier Podcast. I'm Dan Harris. This is the inaugural experimental version of the 10% Happier podcast / vodcast / live streaming show, which is a long way of saying we have no idea what we're doing. Really happy that my first guest is Gretchen Rubin. Thank you very much for doing this. Appreciate it.
I'm very happy to be here.
You've been irrationally supportive of me, this whole process, before I wrote the book, after I wrote the book, and since then. So thank you.
I'm a huge fan of 10% Happier. I think it's a fantastic book. And I've heard from so many people who don't realize that I know you, how much they like it. They're like, there's this book you really ought to read, 10%. I'm like, yeah, I know about that book.
That's amazing. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let me just tell everybody who you are. Gretchen has written a number of fantastic books. The two that I think people are most familiar with is The Happiness Project, which came out in 2010, I believe.
Yeah.
And that is about how you kind of took all the science around happiness and road tested it in your own life.
Exactly.
And then the more recent book, which came out, I believe, in 2015.
Yes.
Which is called Better Than Before, and it's about habits and how to break bad ones and establish new ones.
Right.
So I have a million questions for you. Let me just start with a elegant term you use at the beginning of the book, which is you say that habits are the invisible architecture of our daily lives. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's interesting. Research shows that about 40% of what we do every day is shaped by our habits. And so they're all around us. They're shaping everything that we do. And so if we have habits that work for us, we're much more likely to be happier, healthier, more productive. If those habits aren't working for us, then it's just going to be a much bigger challenge.
I come from the whole mindfulness meditation world. I can't believe that sentence is from my lips. Anyway, I do come from the meditation world, and in that world, the word habitual is a dirty word.
Yes.
So but you don't think habits are bad, so how do you square that?
No, it's interesting because I've heard that from a lot of people because habits are mindless. That is why they are freeing. That is why they are energizing. But I think that these two ideas, mindfulness and mindlessness, actually go together because what you want to do is mindfully shape your habits. You don't want, because when they creep in accidentally, that's when you can get into trouble. But when you mindfully shape a habit, then it can be this great engine for change. But the thing about habits is that they're freeing and energizing because we don't have to make decisions. We don't have to use our self-control. So you can mindfully be brushing your teeth, But you're not deciding, should I brush my teeth? Oh, I brushed my teeth yesterday. Maybe I should let myself off the hook today. Oh, I'm going to brush my teeth tomorrow. And starting this month, I'm going to be so good about brushing my teeth, so I don't have to start until Monday. I mean, you don't get into that. You just do it. And so I think that there really is a place for habits, and even like with your meditating. I mean, you didn't decide every single day I'm going to do it. You were like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to commit to this.
Yes.
It's part of my life now. If every single day you were like, should I do it now? Should I do it later? If you can exhaust yourself and never get around to actually doing the thing that you are thinking that you want to do.
You say in the book, is another phrase I really like, that you are mindfully harnessing the power of mindlessness.
Yes, exactly.
So you're choosing very deliberately
Yes.
what you want to do, and then you kind of automate the process,
Exactly.
so you're not eating up all of your mental energy.
Exactly. It's like putting that on automatic pilot. So you're not using a lot of energy to make it happen.
I want to talk about establishing good habits and breaking bad habits, but you sort of do a taxonomy in the book that I think is important to get into first. You talk about the 4 tendencies, I
Yes.
believe is the term. So they're not, we don't all establish or break habits in the same way.
Yes.
So can you talk, these categories are great because you will, anybody who hears them will automatically put themselves in one of the buckets.
Yeah.
So walk me through the 4 buckets.
So it has to do with how a person responds to the idea of an expectation. So we all have outer expectations, like a work deadline, or an inner expectation, like I want to start meditating every day. So an upholder is someone who readily meets outer and inner. It's upholder, questioner, obliger, and rebel are the four tendencies. So upholders readily meet outer and inner alike.
Which is what you are.
That's what I am. So we readily meet a work deadline. We readily keep a New Year's resolution without much fuss.
So were you a goody two-shoes when you were a kid?
100%. 100%. So, okay, the archetypal upholder, Hermione Granger.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So then.
So you and I would not have gotten
Okay.
along
No, we all get together. We all mix. There aren't that many upholders, so I have many friends who are not upholders.
Okay.
Next are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they're convinced it makes sense. So they hate anything inefficient or arbitrary or irrational. Their first question is, why would I listen to you anyway? So they can do anything if they buy into it. They make everything into an inner expectation. They won't do it just because you tell them to, but if they buy into it, they will do it effortlessly.
But there are 2 types of questioners I learned from your book.
Yeah. So some questioners it's pretty easy to convince them to uphold. Like my husband's like that. Like he readily accepts sort of societal rules. And some questioners are question expectations so much they almost look like rebels. For instance, many questioners question traffic regulations. They say things like, well, I think it's arbitrary that we're all supposed to drive 65 miles an hour. I'm a really good driver, so I think I should be able to drive whatever I think is safe. And I'm like, well, good luck with that, because that's not how traffic regulations work. But for a questioner, they're like, it just seems arbitrary. It drives them crazy.
So I guess I would be a questioner with a upholder leaning, which you describe as like being like a Leo with a Virgo rising.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you mentioned rebels. I think it's pretty obvious what that is.
So rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They won't. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist, and they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. So like for them, unlike other people, they wouldn't want to say like, oh, every day at 7 a.m. I'm going to meditate. Maybe they might want to choose every single time.
But, so what do I do to make sure that my child is not a rebel?
Well, rebels is great. There's a lot of strengths to being a
Really?
rebel. It's hard, but it is hard to be the parent of a rebel child. I've heard from many people asking for advice about how to be the parent of, because the fact is you can't tell them what to do. They have to do what they choose to do.
So you have to give them like a menu of options or something?
Menu of options helps, and then you just remind them, well, this is what you want. Like a friend of mine had a child who didn't want to practice violin, and finally she kept nagging him and reminding him and doing star charts and all that stuff, and it wasn't working. And I was like, he's a rebel. Tell him he can do it if he wants to, but if not, you're not going to pay for lessons, because you're not going to pay for it if he's not going to do it, if he's not going to practice. And so
Did it work?
She said to him, you say you want to practice violin. You're not going to get good at violin if you don't practice. You know that's true. So up to you. You tell me, what do you want to do? And he was like, okay. And then he practices, because he wants to play the violin. But when she was telling him to do it, he had to resist to show, well, you're not the boss of me.
And then the 4th category is obligers.
And that's the biggest tendency. That's the one that most people fit
Really?
into. Yes.
I would have thought it was questioners.
Questioners second largest. Overwhelmingly, people are questioners or obligers. Upholder and rebel are like the extreme tendencies, they're small. Overwhelmingly, people are questioners or obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So, like a friend of mine told me, well, the weird thing about me is I really want to exercise, and when I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice, so why can't I go running now? Well, when she had a team and a coach waiting for her, she had no trouble going, but it was only her own inner expectation. Then she struggled. And so, and a lot of people are like that. Like they'll meet all the expectations that others have for them, but then they're frustrated because they can't meet their expectations for themselves.
So I would imagine the most important thing when you're trying to figure out how to make or break a habit is to figure out which bucket you're in first.
Yeah, that's really helpful because it will help you figure out how to push the buttons on yourself. Or, it's even more fun is to try to change someone else's habit. And it can really help you if you're trying to understand that. Like doctors often, I've been hearing from a lot of doctors saying, now that I understand the 4 tendencies, I can kind of tailor my advice because telling somebody like someone's a type 2 diabetic and you're trying to get them to do certain things, you might behave very differently when you're talking to a questioner than when you're talking to a rebel.
But I was... this was not on my little list of questions that I nerdily
Let's go
typed
off-road.
We're going off-road here. But I would imagine trying to change other people's habits, like especially with a spouse, is dangerous territory.
No, it is. It is.
I know you try to do it.
No. And in my and from the Happiness Project, one of the deep principles that I came to believe in is the only person that we can change is ourselves. But it is also true that when we change, others can change. And when we change, a relationship changes. And so if I am speaking in a way that I think is going to resonate more deeply with you, then I can help you. Right. So it's not about like me actually forcing you to make a change. It's me understanding how to set up a situation in order to make it possible for you to make that change yourself. Because sometimes we do things unwittingly, because we don't understand how other people might be different from us, and so the kind of thing that would work with us isn't going to work with them, and so we're just not helpful.
My wife doesn't meditate.
Okay, there you go.
And there was a cartoon in the New Yorker not long ago. It had 2 women having lunch, and one of them says to the other, "I've been gluten-free for a week, and I'm already annoying." And I just keep that in mind. Like I can't. I know I can't. If I proselytize to her, she will never do it.
That's right.
So I don't say anything.
That's
and I actually think when I was,
is she a questioner?
I don't know what she is.
Okay. Because one thing about questioners I've noticed is like a lot of my family is questioners, is that if they just see you succeeding with something, like I'm into high intensity weight training, and my father-in-law like kind of paid no attention, and then one day he's like, I'm going. And now he's been faithfully going ever since. And I was always talking in a very annoying way about how much I love doing it, but it was like he had to make up his mind for himself that this was worth doing. And then once he did it. So it could be that way with your wife. One day she'll just be like, you know what? I've seen enough. I'm convinced. I'll try it. And that's your example is more persuasive than your
lecturing.
Nudging.
Yeah. I mean, I think she may be an obliger, actually. The more I think about it.
Well, she could be having obliger rebellion.
Yeah, I think that's and this is, well, I'll let you talk about it, but you talk about this in the book. This is a specific thing that happens with obligers.
So obligers, they feel this, they get frustrated by the fact that they're meeting other people's expectations, but they're not meeting their expectations for themselves. And they will get in this, they have this very striking pattern where they will meet an expectation, and then suddenly, kind of without warning, they will snap and be like, this I will not do. And sometimes it's really a small, symbolic, and kind of funny thing. Like, it's weird how many obligers have emailed me to tell me that they were so annoyed because a coworker told them, was like nudging them for being late to work, that they will deliberately sit in their cars for 5 or 10 minutes to be late, deliberately late. Okay, that's obliger rebellion. But sometimes it can be huge and explosive, like quitting a job without any kind of opportunity, like we need to make this right, or blowing up a relationship, like I've had enough of you, I can't take it anymore. And sometimes it will find its place, and it's often things having to do with like health, which I think because it's totally within the control of the obliger. They're like, I'm meeting expectations, but this thing I will not do. I will not go to the gym. You cannot make me go to the gym. And it could be that your wife, if she's an obliger, has sort of keyed in on this as like, I'm doing so much, this I will not do.
It's possible.
It's like my last stand.
But I will say I've never pressured her.
Right.
Which is, I think, the only reason why it's even a live possibility at this point. Because
right,
if I ever pressured her,
yeah.
it would be off the table.
Right.
So I want to ask you about the habit that I want to break,
Ooh.
Which is sugar.
Yeah. Ooh.
And this is a true story.
I quit sugar.
I know you did. This is why I want to hear. But in the not too distant past, I ate one night sitting right here watching TV with my wife, which is our Sunday night ritual. I ate so many Oreos. Actually, they were Whole Foods Oreos. That I woke up in the middle of the night and puked. True story. Ooh. Yeah, so I have a problem.
Now, were you eating them mindlessly, like just one after the other, or were you like, oh my gosh, these are so good, I can't stop?
No, the former.
Okay, so it was just like...
That's my jam, is mindlessly eating.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay. So, do you want to quit sugar altogether?
I love sugar. It's like really my only remaining vice since I quit doing drugs 10 years ago, and I don't drink. I really don't have any real vices, so I love sugar.
Yeah.
But I feel there's a real addictive thought loop going on around it, because I usually restrict myself to one day a week, but I'm like looking forward to it, kind of planning out exactly what I'm going to have. It feels kind of gross.
Right. It feels like a chain.
Yes.
So would you describe yourself as and I think you are, like an all or nothing kind of person? Like, it's not that hard to say no, but once you start, you can't stop.
That's exactly. I have abstained for long periods of time, but when I start, I can't stop.
Right. Okay, so one of the things that I talk about in the book is the difference between abstainers and moderators when it comes to facing a strong temptation. And often it has to do with food. It might be sugar. It might be something like chips. Or it could even be something like World of Warcraft. Or like my sister had to quit doing Candy Crush because it was actually interfering with her career. So how do you face a strong temptation? And I'm an abstainer, so we're alike in this way. It's easier to have none. It's easier to give something up altogether than to indulge in moderation. And moderators, on the other hand, they get kind of crazy and they feel sort of panicky if they're told they can never have something. Mm-hmm. And those are the people who keep the bar of Toblerone chocolate in their desk drawer, and then like once a day or every other day they have one square. And I'm like, my whole day would be this thinking about it. So I would argue that even once a week is enough to keep that craving hitting, because it's always coming up on the horizon, and then that always opens up the possibility, well, it's my birthday, or I'm on vacation, or, and it might be that it would just be, and what I found, because I had a tremendous sweet tooth too, when I just said I don't eat sugar at all, that whole noise in my head that was super boring just went dead. And so I walk into a store and they have a big bowl of free candy. Do I eat it? No, I don't, because I don't eat sugar. Oh, it's my birthday and they're serving me dessert for free because the restaurant gives me free dessert. Do I eat it? No, I don't, because I don't eat sugar.
Sad.
So what you can do, I don't think it's helpful to have like once a week, because then it's always coming up on the horizon.
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can say something like, okay, well, it's going to be our anniversary, and so I'm really looking forward to it. It's like I'm expecting that I'm going to eat sugar. I'm going to really, really relish it.
This is you.
No, I do. I have to say, I do not do it. For me, it's easier to have none. So I really am the killjoy who will not have, and you like make me a cake. Like for me personally, I'm like, sorry, I don't eat sugar. I'm rare. Very few people abstain the way that I do. But what most people do is that they'll say, like, oh, this is a special occasion, I'm going to look forward to it. Where people really get in trouble, I think, is like the once a week thing, or like, or after the gym, which is the dumbest way to do it. Or on the spot, like, oh yeah, I'm not eating sugar, but oh, here we are, and it's the specialty of the house, tiramisu, I have to have it. Right. And so you're doing it on the fly, and so you feel out of control of yourself. Whereas if you're saying, like, I'm looking forward to it, it's on the calendar, it's going to be great, and then, so one question is, do you look back on it with pleasure? Do you look back on those Oreos with pleasure?
Not the way they came up.
Going down, yes. Other way, no. So it's like, if you're like, oh, it was a wonderful addition, like, oh, Christmas dinner, it was so amazing, then that's like a pleasure. But it's when it feels out of control.
No, I go directly into a shame spiral.
No, and it's just boring to think about it. Like,
yes.
See, moderators, it's for them, they have to know they can have a little, and then they can have, if they have a little, then they're satisfied. And also, like, do you really care? Like, a lot of times people are like, oh, but it's so sad to think of a life without sugar. How sad is it?
It's pretty sad to me.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Why is it sad
Why
to me?
is it sad?
Because I think I associate it with, like, freedom.
Ooh, okay. Talk about that.
Because I feel like Sunday night is I'm so disciplined all the time.
Yes.
I meditate, I exercise, I work really hard.
Okay. So
if my boss is watching, I work super hard.
Yeah. Okay, but so maybe you need another treat. I think you want to give yourself a treat, but this is the only treat that you found.
Yes.
What is another treat? Could you buy yourself new music? Weren't you the one who told me that every week you buy yourself new music?
I do buy myself new
That's
music.
a great treat.
Yes.
Okay, so what's something that can be your Sunday night treat? What would be like something...
TV.
Okay, but you already give yourself that treat. So the thing about the sugar is it goes with the TV.
Yes.
So what's another treat? Maybe you want a treat that can go on with that.
Yes, I got to think about that. What would be
a treat? Because what you're saying is, I need, and I think, and
French fries.
French fries. Okay, but maybe that's okay. Like you can have one order of French fries and feel good about it, and it doesn't trigger that whole thing.
It triggers a little bit, but it's not like coconut cake.
Right. Yes. Well, because in Better Than Before, I talk about the strategy of treats. Like, it's important to give ourselves treats because we're like cell phones that need a charge. If you don't give yourself enough treats, that's when you start getting into this, I need it, I want it, I have to have so many Oreos that I'm going to throw up. You know, it's like you need to give yourself healthy treats so you have that feeling of like, when you give more to yourself, you can ask more from yourself, and you're asking a lot from yourself, and you feel like, I need to bring myself back into equilibrium. I need a treat to give myself energy. So you just mindfully want to shape that treat. And French fries, maybe that's the thing. Like, what's the restaurant you can order in? The best French fries in New York City. Eat them, enjoy them. It'll be a delicious treat, and it won't set off that sugar trigger that is so painful.
I like that a lot. I'm curious about your own personal habits because I had lunch with you not too long ago before your book came out, and you were really disciplined about what you eat, and you actually mentioned that you have changed the way you eat, and I think in part as a consequence from what you learned in doing the book.
Yes, yeah. Well, it was actually before the book, but I didn't really understand what had happened to me until I wrote the book because this weird transformation had kind of fallen on me. I was on vacation and I read Gary Taubes' book, Why We Get Fat, and it convinced me to go low carb.
So you're gluten-free or?
Oh, I'm way past gluten-free. Yeah. Like, I really eat a very low-carb diet. I eat a little more low-carb than Gary Taubes does. But everyone needs a hobby. And this for me works. I'm not saying this is the way everybody would want to eat. But I do avoid carbs.
So the rest of your life you have resigned yourself to not having pasta carbonara.
No. But it's not resign myself. Like, I really revel in it. And I'm fortunate in that, like, I'm the kind of person who likes to eat basically the same food all the time. So that's fine for me. I'm not a foodie who feels like a lot of regret about giving things up because I always like very basic food. But I don't feel resigned. I feel free. I love it. I love eating this way because I'm not hungry. I used to be so hungry the way that I ate. Food is really rich and satisfying, and I just, I feel much healthier. I lost a bunch of weight. I didn't intend to, but that's what happened.
You didn't need to.
I didn't need to, but I was interested in this. It's interesting. I was interested in the book because my sister is a type 1 diabetic, and so if you look at the book, it's all about insulin. And so
this is Taubes' book.
Taubes' book, Why We Get Fat. So when I was in the bookstore, I was flipping through it, and I saw that it was all about insulin, and that was what got me intrigued because if you're a diabetic, and especially a type 1 diabetic, it's like insulin is, the thing that saves your life. So I wanted to learn more about it. And then, in Better Than Before, I described what happened, which is the strategy of the lightning bolt, which is when you have a new piece of information or you have some experience and all of a sudden your habits change almost effortlessly because you just have some new belief and so your habits fall in line. And so when my thoughts about nutrition changed, because with eating habits, they're like, do these substitutions, like part skim mozzarella, or like that it would have to be incremental change. It's such a ubiquitous, part of our lives. Like, how could you change it overnight, effortlessly? And yet that's what happened to me.
It just happened.
Yeah, I was just like overnight. Well, it was funny. We were on vacation with my in-laws, and so we were staying in this, like in a hotel. And so, like the next day, when I went out to the breakfast buffet, it's like I got the opposite of what I'd gotten for like the last 100 years. And I was like, scrambled eggs and bacon. All right, let's see if this works. This is Gary Taubes says this is what I should be eating. Let's see what happens. Yeah, and it's like in data point 1, like I'll just experiment on myself. Like, let's see what happens.
But as you say, hearing about people's personal transformation can often be more powerful than reading studies.
But don't you find that to be true with yourself?
Do.
Like, people are more, hearing your experience is more persuasive to them than to read like a million studies of.
Well, I don't know. I'm a total narcissist, so I think everybody thinks my story is like super interesting.
Academy is a new scripted podcast that follows Ava Richards, a brilliant scholarship student attending Bishop Gray Academy, the country's most exclusive boarding school. Academy takes you into the world of a cutthroat private school where power, money, and sex collide in a game of life and death. Binge all 10 episodes of Academy early and ad-free on Wondery Plus.
But here, actually, speaking of meditation, you knew this question was coming.
Oh.
You have not been able to create a meditation habit.
No. I did successfully create the meditation habit. I did not successfully find meditation to be helpful. I then had to break the meditation habit because it was like the habit was there for me.
What was not helpful to you? I
The
mean,
meditating.
why was it? Why was it not helpful? Sorry.
I mean, I was
rephrase
just
that.
like just sitting there for 5 minutes, like trying to clear my thoughts and quiet mind and getting back to the breath. And then I tried, when you have an image in your mind, like that seems to be kind of like baby steps. Like if you're like not really managed to clear your mind, okay, well you can focus on an image.
Yes.
Tried that.
Visualization.
Visualization.
Yes, yes.
Tried that. Now, I have to say, at the time that I did it, I wasn't using guided meditation. Because for me, I was like, well, then I'll just be thinking what the people say. So that seemed... And then I tried with your app to do the guided meditation, and that did seem better. So maybe if I try it again, probably at some time I'll try it again, I would do it with a guided meditation, because that maybe I needed that kind of scaffolding. But I was only trying to do it for 5 minutes, and it just started making me nuts. It was not having, like, the promised effects at all.
On the cushion or off the cushion? In other words, on the cushion you were
Either.
feeling nuts?
I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is the longest 5 minutes of my life.
Right.
Yeah.
That is actually, that to me says you were doing it right. Because if it's easy for you, you're cheating. It's a little bit like going to the gym. If you go to the gym and it's like a walk in the park, it's like that's cheating.
Right.
Because when you're meditating, you're fighting
Yes.
millennia of evolution, which is like this
gerbil
blah,
wheel.
blah, 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 gerbil wheel of thought. And so you're trying to not stop the thinking, because that's actually impossible unless you're enlightened or dead.
Yeah.
What you're trying to do in meditation is to focus.
Yes.
For nanoseconds at a time, get lost, start again, get lost, start again. That is really hard to do, especially at the beginning.
But so I think I faced a problem that a lot of people face when they're changing a habit, which is at what point do you say this isn't working? Like it's like for a while you have to say this is hard. It's hard to go to the gym. I don't want to do it, and yet is it at some point going to get easier? And I'm going to see the benefits of it. And then at one point you say, you know what, this just isn't right for me. And so it's a misuse of my time and my energy. Like a night person, if you're a night person, the idea that you're going to get up at 6 a.m., like it's not going to work for you. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but if you're a hardcore night person, you're not going to get up at 6 a.m. and do anything consistently. It just goes too hard against your nature. So at what point do I say, this is difficult for me, but that shows that I'm doing it right. And so if I keep on going, then it's going to all click in and I'm going to experience the benefit. At one point do I just say, like, hey, you know what, guys? I'm out of here because this isn't working. Now, I did it for 5 months.
That's a good long time.
I mean, I felt like that was
long time.
I felt like that was a good try.
That's a very good try. It is a very good try. So I will resist the urge to browbeat you.
No, do browbeat me.
No,
you're the one that eventually, I wasn't even going to try again. And then I was like, well, if Dan, because I think we're kind of similar in many respects in our personality. I was like, well, if Dan felt like it was really worth it, and then I'm like, then I can see how it would be for me. And you also said something that I thought was incredibly persuasive, which was you said, I know people who haven't stuck to it for whatever reason, but I don't know anyone who thinks it was a waste of time. And I was like,
except for you.
well, I don't think it was a waste of time because it was an interesting experiment, but I have to say that I did not feel the benefits. How long did it take you before you started feeling the benefits?
I started to see it after a couple of weeks. Two big benefits. One was that it boosted my ability to focus, which has never been a strong suit of mine. And the other thing is that it just makes you more mindful, which basically, for the uninitiated, means that you're not so yanked around by the voice in your head.
Yeah.
And so that means you're resisting your urges. Like obviously, I'm not so good at resisting the urge to eat sugar, but you resist urges to like say the thing that's going to ruin the next 48 hours of your marriage, or
send the email.
Yes, send the email that you will totally regret. And when I knew it was starting to work is when I would overhear my wife at parties telling people that I was less of a jerk. That was a huge data point.
That's persuasive.
The mistake that people make, and I'm not sure you're making this mistake, but this is a mistake that gets made not infrequently, is people judge the value of the practice based on their experience on the cushion.
Oh, I see, right.
But because it's frustrating, people extrapolate that to mean that they're failing.
It's not working.
Correct. But in fact, it's the judo move of seeing that this voice in your head is in the business of offering up terrible ideas.
Yeah.
And then noticing, oh, that's just a thought, and returning to your whatever you're meditating on, usually your breath. That process is a bicep curl for your brain, and it changes the way you relate to this thought machine in your head, which sometimes is brilliant and is often negative, repetitive, and self-referential. As you mentioned, I'm trying to build this app, the 10% Happier app, to teach people how to meditate.
It's cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
I had the best experience using your app than I did, doing solo. I have
What,
to say.
what do you recommend in terms of like getting, I'm thinking a lot now, especially being in the middle of your book, about how to help people establish habits.
Yep.
Meditation is a hard habit to establish.
It is.
What would you recommend like for us to keep in mind as we build this thing?
Well, I think a key thing is if you're an obliger, or if you're dealing with someone who's an obliger, it's just a giant number of people are obligers, so it's a big issue. For obligers, the key thing for them is outer accountability. If they want to meet an inner expectation, there has to be some form of outer accountability. They just need that. And so it could be whether there's like if a person wanted to use it and is like, okay, I want to try meditating, I'm going to get this out, but how do I get myself to stick to it? So part of it is like, do you want to form a group with other people who are trying to change a habit? And they don't all have to be changing the same habit, it's just the accountability. And there's a starter kit on my site, GretchenRubin.com, for people who want to form accountability groups for people trying to change a habit. Or maybe it's like a Facebook group, or like you and your sister want to do it together, and every morning you're going to be like, did you do it today? Or sometimes apps will, like a lot of apps have things where it's like you have to, before you go forward, you have to say, yes, I did it yesterday, or you get.
Right.
But the thing about obligers is, just like the questioners come in different varieties, some obligers can be, their feeling of obligation is triggered by something like an auto text from an app. And they'll be like, oh, I got to do it. And then some, it's like only a real consequence from a live person is going to make them feel. And some people, like if they pay for something, that makes them feel obligated. For some people, if they pay, they almost feel like, man, I paid. It's like as good as going. Now I'm off the hook. And so you have to know yourself what kind of thing is going to make you stick to it. Or something that works for a lot of obligers is their duty to other people, or their duty as a role model. So you could say, let's say you've got 3 kids, you could be like, hey kids, I'm going to do this, and because I want to model the behavior of someone keeping their word to themselves, and I want to model healthy behavior, I have to stick with it because I want my children to see that I can follow through with something. Or you could say like, oh, I'm only going to do it if my husband does it. And so if you don't do it, I won't do it. So we both have to do it because we want to do it for the other person. That's something that works a lot. I've even heard of obligers doing things like, so you love to go for bike rides, and I'm your wife and I'm an obliger. You can only go for a bike ride if I've meditated that day. And so if I don't meditate, then if you're like, oh, honey, I'm disappointed I can't go for my bike ride. So that might make me meditate. So, so there's all these ways to think about how to trigger that outer accountability for that inner expectation.
We could build emotional blackmail directly into
because and obligers will say to me like, well, I don't want to have to be accountable to somebody else. I don't want to have outer accountability. But I'm like, if that's what you need, that's what you need. Just figure out a way to get it. It's usually not that hard. But here's another thing about obligers. If someone asks you for accountability, you should really help them get it. People don't ask for accountability unless they know they need it. And so sometimes like you'll talk to 2 people and one will be like 2 coworkers, and one's like, you got to give me a deadline. The other one's like, no, just get around to it whenever you get around to it. No, this person's asking you, I need accountability. If they ask for accountability, give them accountability because they need it.
You've been great with my questions. Now, this is as I said, we're totally experimenting with this.
Yes.
Whatever you want to call it, podcast, vodcast.
Vodcast, I've never heard that word before.
Video,
I love it. I love
it. Cast. So we want to we want to institute a little tradition toward the end of the thing where we do like a speed round that we're calling pro tips. So I'm going to throw out some areas, and then you and I are going to go quickly through what to do.
Okay.
All right. So the first is, what do I need to know if I want to establish or end a habit?
The first thing you have to do is know yourself, because there is no magic one-size-fits-all solution. It's not do it for 30 days or start small or give yourself a cheat day or do it first thing in the morning. You have to begin by saying, well, what's true for me? Am I a morning person? Am I a night person? Am I an abstainer or a moderator? Which tendency am I? Do I like to be in an atmosphere of abundance? Do I need a lot of simplicity? There's a million things to know about yourself that then you can set up the habit in a way that suits you. Because just the fact that it worked for your brother-in-law and Steve Jobs doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. You really have to begin by thinking about yourself.
So know thyself is rule number 1.
Yes, 100%.
What's rule number 2?
Then once you do it, figure out how to set up the habit in a way that works for you. So a lot of times people who are night people say, oh, I'm going to get up early and go running. That's not going to work for you. So instead of like spending all your energy trying to figure out how to get up in the morning, force yourself to get up in the morning, figure out, well, how can I work, I have all these things, how can I work out later in the afternoon? So you have to think about, knowing what you know about yourself, how can you create a realistic habit that you can really stick to?
What about scheduling?
Scheduling works really well not for rebels, but for everybody else, scheduling works really well. So I have 21 strategies in Better Than Before. That's one of the first and most powerful. For most people, they're much more likely to stick to something if it's actually on the schedule. And that includes fun. So if you feel like, oh, I never have time for fun, it's like put that in your calendar, just like a trip to the dentist. Like I have, read. I have 2 hours where I read every weekend because I'm like, if I don't put it on the calendar, it might not happen. And that's the most important thing to me.
What about monitoring?
That's really important too. Yeah, like we manage what we measure. So if there's something that's important to you, you want to track it. Whether that's like tracking your budget, tracking how many steps you take with a device tracker, or sometimes people are like, well, you can't measure the most important things in life. You can usually come up with an approximation. Like if you want to read to your child every night, well, how often do you actually do that? You might tell yourself you do it a lot more than you actually do, or you might actually feel guilty when in fact you're doing a pretty good job. So if you monitor something, and also monitoring has an uncanny power. Just by monitoring, we often start to behave better. Just because it gets back to mindfulness. We're more mindful about what we're doing because we're more aware of what we're actually doing, and so we tend to do a better job.
Why is it that when we're trying to create a good habit or end a bad habit, we find that toward the end of the day,
yes,
we mess up?
We all need to have self-mastery. And like if there's something in life that you want to have a lot of self-mastery. And the longer you go through your day, you just sort of start wearing up that self-mastery. And so you want to make sure that you do things like get enough sleep, don't let yourself get too hungry. Exercise exercise boosts energy. It doesn't diminish energy the way some people think. Like keeping your outer environment sort of under control often does help people keep their self-mastery. And if there's something that is going to tax you, you do not want to have it happen at the end of the day.
So self-mastery is kind of a finite resource, and we run
Well,
out
it's
of it.
Interesting. There's a controversy about that because some people argue that self-mastery is a finite resource. It's sort of like your muscle, and you use it up, and then it becomes tired, or it's like a gas tank that becomes depleted. Now, some people argue that it's not because it's part of our imagination, and that you can get people to find new reserves of willpower if you change the way you do it. Like, for instance, I'm not sure this was why this study was done, but they had children try to stand still, and they couldn't do it, fidgeting, and then they said, stand still like a soldier. And instantly the children could stand perfectly still because their imaginations had been cued. And so sometimes with willpower, it's like if you go into a different part of your brain, you see things differently, you might find new reserves. But whether or not, whichever model of self-mastery is actually the most true. The fact is, we've all experienced it in real life. As the day moves on, as you get closer to bedtime, as you become increasingly tired, as you've been increasingly taxed and found more and more things where you had to use your self-mastery, it becomes harder and harder. That is why you were not eating those Oreos at 9:30 a.m. on a Sunday.
That's why I had a bag of veggie puffs last night at midnight.
See, that's the danger zone. And that's a reason to go to bed on time. Because if you go to bed on time, often you sleep right through that. It's like that zombie-like period before, when you're up too late.
So that's a key part of making or breaking habits.
Go
to bed on time.
Go to bed, yes.
Because then you get out of the danger zone.
Yeah, and also fights with your spouse or like a roommate or something or yelling at your kids. Like that is not.
So I need to make my wife go to bed earlier.
100. Well, so most adults, you have to figure out how much sleep you need. This is really helpful. If you figure out, most people know what time they have to wake up. Do the math. If you need 7 hours of sleep, do the math, and that is your bedtime. And so a lot of people now even set an alarm. Have an alarm go off to remind you to go to bed. Because a lot of times people are like, well, I'll go to bed whenever I'm tired. But then they do things to jack themselves awake, like start binge watching Game of Thrones or whatever. And then you're like, I'm wide awake. Or like you check your work email and you're like, you get that boost of adrenaline. So then you're up till 1, when in fact you should have gone to bed at 10:30.
Well, this is perfect. I wasn't planning on doing this, but now that we're in the speed round, what are more tips?
My answers are not speedy.
No, they're pretty good. Pretty good. More tips. If you are a bad sleeper, what are the Gretchen Rubin tips for falling asleep?
So it's to wake up at the same time every day, even on the weekends, because there's something called social jet lag, which is people who sleep very late on the weekends. Then they, from what they do during the week, it's like they're flying back and forth to the West Coast every week. So you want to wake up at the same time every day. Give yourself a bedtime and set an alarm, and you might even need to have a snooze alarm that says like, okay, 15 minutes till your bedtime. And so if you're up an hour past your bedtime, One thing that's really helped me is I now get ready for bed well before I plan to go to bed, because what I realized is I was so exhausted by the prospect of having to like brush my teeth and take out my contact lenses that I would just stay up, which is clearly irrational. So if like now that I'm like I get all ready for bed well before, so that when I get the urge to go to sleep, it's much easier. Getting rid of light, like blinking your television apparatus they emit crazy amounts of light now, or a glowing clock. You want to cover those.
What about lowering the temperature in the room?
Lowering the temperature, absolutely. That's something that helps.
Open a window or put the AC on?
Yeah. That's what my husband does that religiously. And exercise. Exercise helps people fall asleep faster and sleep more deeply. So if you're not getting any exercise, it will boost your energy during the day and also give you more self-mastery, but it will also help you sleep at night.
What about not using your bed as a place where you're doing work or non-sleep related things?
Yes. I mean, yeah, that's a really good one. I don't even read in bed, really. I only just, do bed things in bed. But I do sometimes watch TV in bed. But not often. Yeah.
But
like not like sitting there with your laptop, like answering work emails. No. You want your bed to feel like a refuge. And even your room. Like one thing is if your room is really messy, it can just make you feel like keyed up. I'm a big believer that outer order contributes to inner calm. And so like I have a friend who had like piles and piles of photographs sitting on her ledge. And I walked in there and I'm like, man, that's just stressing me out seeing those. She's like, oh yeah, they've been there for like 3 years because I can't deal with it. I'm like, you have to deal with it and get that out of your bedroom. And she said, I sleep so much better because I walk in and it's like so calm, And I make my bed every day. I think that is something like coming home to a made bed. Some people find an unmade bed more inviting. So it's like, it just depends on the kind of person that you are. But for a lot of people, like seeing just like that, it just feels more inviting to like, it feels cool and neat. That can be something too.
You led us right into the last thing I want to ask you about in the pro tip round here, which is we're coming up on spring, decluttering.
Yes.
How do we do it?
I love decluttering.
I know.
Yes. I feel like I like self-medicate by decluttering whenever I'm stressed out.
You were decluttering before Marie Kondo.
Yes. So there's a bunch of little habits that I formed that really help. One is the 1 minute rule. Anything that you can do in less than a minute, do without delay. So if you can hang up a coat, if you can put a dish in the dishwasher, if you can close a cabinet, if you can print out an email and delete it, if you can do it in less than a minute, do it without delay. That gets rid of the sort of scum on the surface of life. A weird thing that I wouldn't have thought worked, but somebody told me, and it really does work, is every time you leave a room, take one thing with you. You don't have to actually put it away, but just get it closer to where it's supposed to be. So if you have I have a dirty coffee mug in my office, I'm not going to take it all the way to the dishwasher, but I can put it on the stand in the entryway, and now it's closer to the kitchen. And that also just helps things find their way. I realized that I never hung up my coat, or never hang up clothes because I don't like putting things on hangers, so I put hooks in my closet, and now I will put my coat on a hook because I am too lazy to put it on a hanger. Yes, that's the level. Put trash cans everywhere so it's easy to throw things away. One of Marie Kondo's things that I think really works is if you're trying to clear something out, take everything out of a drawer, take everything out of a closet, and then put it back in. And I found that even things where I thought I had gone through clothes or coats, when I did it that way, I got rid of a whole other layer of stuff.
Why is decluttering so important?
See, I think that this is something that people should really study. I don't think there's enough research into this area because I really feel powerfully myself, and so many people have told me they feel the same way, that there's something about getting control over the stuff of your life that makes you feel more in control of your life generally. And if it's an illusion, it's a helpful illusion. And it just is something, there's a minority of people who love clutter, who don't even see it, who thrive in it. Okay, fine, we all know who they are, they know who they are, go off and do that. But most people just feel better when they're in an orderly environment, and more than it seems like it should, because we can all agree that this kind of stuff is trivial in the context of a happy life, like how messy your kitchen is, and yet over and over people say to me how they feel more energetic, they feel more optimistic, they feel more creative. A friend of mine said, I finally cleaned out my fridge and now I know I can switch careers. And I knew how that felt, because it's like this feeling of like just having space to think and just having things in their proper places, not having to look for things, getting rid of things that don't work. Stuff kind of weighs on our conscience. You're like, oh, here's this thing that I never wear, or oh, I spent all this money on these shoes, but I don't wear them, or this is this office supply that kind of broke. Like I had a giant shredder. It broke the first time I used it. I was like, well, I can't get rid of it, right? Because I just bought it. I'm not going to get it fixed. Where do you get a shredder fixed? So it just sat there for 2 years. And finally I was like, okay, get the giant shredder out of my house. It doesn't work.
And it felt better.
It felt, what was I doing? I mean, like, give it up the minute it does, it broke. It was, yeah, I felt better. Off my shelves and off my conscience.
Thank you very much.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate that. Or listening, whatever you're doing. And this is Dan Harris signing off. What do you say at the end of the podcast?
I'd say onward and upward at the end of my podcast.
Onward and upward.
There we go.
My thanks again to Gretchen. Sorry to you, dear listener, for the suboptimal audio quality, but I think you probably, if you've listened this far, got a lot out of it. Much more from us, including more guests and more guided meditations coming up. Big thanks to my producers, and we'll see you next time. Hey, Prime members. You can listen to 10% Happier early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Download the Amazon Music app today. Or you can listen early and ad-free with Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts. Before you go, do us a solid and tell us all about yourself by completing a short survey at Wondery.com/survey.